This episode of Tales from the Backlog about 1000xRESIST is brought to you by the wonderful people who support the show over on Patreon. These fine folks are Chris Nelson, the Top 3 Podcast crew, Chris Copleen, Eric Guess, Rick Firestone, Nick Ficori, Jill, Jeff, formerly Jerf, Kieran, Soccer, ZNA, Cupcake, Kyle, Christian S., Matt aka Stormageddon, JD, Doug Leaf, Jason Emery, Brian Skirsha, Randall, Jake Martin, Jenny E., Kurt Mattis, and many more. If you enjoy the podcast and you'd like to be like them, you can do so over at patreon.com/realdavejackson. All patrons are able to vote in polls for a game that I do on the show each month. They'll get bonus episodes and my everlasting love and respect. Once again, if that sounds interesting to you, that's patreon.com/realdavejackson. And with all that being said, Heki Almo, and let's start the show. Hello everybody, my name is Dave Jackson, and you're listening to Tales from the Backlog. This is a video games deep dive review podcast where each week I'm joined by a guest to bring a game out of the backlog, play it, and discuss. My guest today is a friend of the show, an editor and writer at IGN, previously senior editor and host at GameSpot, and you've seen him all around, such as on Giant Bomb, Kind of Funny, and many other places, and he always makes sure to praise the Allmother. Welcome, Michael Higham.
Hey, Heki Almo,
That's
of y'all
right.
out there. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Hell yeah.
Sphere to square, sister. Today, happy to have you here. We're going to talk about a game that was not in the original plans for the podcast for this year. I got it on a whim, reached out for a review code on a whim, played it, and it's been burning a hole in my brain ever since I started playing it, so I'm so happy to be talking about it. That game today is 1000xRESIST. It is a narrative adventure developed by Sunset Visitor and published by Fellow Traveler for PC and Switch in 2024. And a real quick shout out to Sunset Visitor and Fellow Traveler for sending me a review code. It is much appreciated. If this is your first time listening to the podcast today, first of all, thank you for stopping by. Here's how spoilers work on the podcast. We're going to talk for a little while. We're going to deep dive as much as we can without spoiling anything about the story that the developers didn't say themselves in like the Steam description and stuff like that. So if you haven't played, don't worry. We're not going to spoil what happens. You can check down in the show notes. There is a timestamp for when spoilers begin, so you can go into 1000xRESIST as fresh as you would like to. And it is a game that I think benefits from that. So what is 1000xRESIST? We have some elevator pitches at the top of the show here. I say it's a memory-hopping, high-concept sci-fi narrative plus extremely real-world human themes as well. Michael, what would you say?
My elevator pitch for this game is Nier Automata meets Neon Genesis Evangelion meets the best possible young adult Tumblr account made by an Asian American. And trust me, I am Asian American and I've grew up around all of them and I know how these Tumblr posts go.
Hell yeah.
Let me tell you something. This is peak Tumblr posting. And what I mean, actually, let me back that up a second, because my era of Tumblr was like a lot of emo kids and scene kids talking about their feelings. I feel like nowadays Tumblr is a little bit different, where it's like has a lot of subcultures in it with their own set of memes and stuff. So I think I need to make that distinction, actually.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
I know almost nothing about Tumblr and Tumblr culture. I've never been a part of anything on there. I've just seen funny stuff that gets shared around, but was not part of my social media history there.
Yeah, I'll say for 2009 to 2012 Tumblr.
Okay, right on. I played this on PC and Steam Deck, mostly on Steam Deck. Runs really well on Steam Deck. I had no problems at all. It was a nice play before bed and then have fucked up dreams type of game. It took me 14 hours to get through a whole playthrough. Michael, does that sound like your experience too?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah. It took me about 12 hours, I would say. I mean, there's like no hour count on the game, but yeah, I pretty much clocked like 12 hours. And it is definitely a game that messes with your head. And I think it drops a lot on you in terms of stewing on like each chapter I played. I was like, I'm stewing on this and kind of forming my own thoughts, and the meaning has changed and all that. So yeah, that is a very accurate experience, I would say.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So let's rewind a little bit before we get into the game itself. Let's talk about how we came across this game. Now, the reason I reached out to you to be a guest on the podcast today is I saw you tweet, and I think you said something like, this is one of the most important games that you've ever played. And I was like, all right, I got to ask him. So how did you come across this game? What put it on your radar?
I saw this at Day of the Devs back in December last year. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Day of the Devs during like Game Awards weekend or week, there's a Day of the Devs event. And so I passed by it and I noticed, it's really funny. So I passed by the booth and I noticed that the people at the demo station were Asian.
Okay.
And then for me, I'm like, oh shit, these are my people. I need to talk to them. Or so at least, at first I saw what was on the screen. And I saw that the characters were distinctly Asian. And I saw that they were doing like some really wild visual things, like when you fly through the different nodes and the dream sequences. I was looking at that at the demo station. And so I pulled up and I'm like, oh, what's this game about? And then so I was talking to the writer and the creative director about it. And they were like super chill. Like they're my age. We're like in our late 20s, early 30s. So it comes from this place that is very familiar to me. And then so we're talking about like, you know, the Asian American experience. They're Canadian, so but the experience is very similar. Like our parents are immigrants. They came to the West and they settled here, and so we have a very like they're from a Chinese background, from a Filipino background, but there's so much common ground. And so we spent like an hour just like chopping it up about our experiences, which was like super fun.
Yeah.
I was like, oh cool, like I'm definitely gonna keep my eye on this game, and yeah, and then I saw them again at Day of the Devs during GDC here, and GDC's in San Francisco. I live here. So I stopped by Day of the Devs and I saw them there. I was like, oh, like, it's good to see y'all again. And it's like, hey, how's the game coming along? He's like, and they were like, hey, we're announcing a release date soon. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm keeping an eye out for sure. Mm-hmm. So that's how the game was definitely on my radar since then. So and then when it came out, so I didn't get review code. I just bought it on day one. Yeah. And I slowly played through it like a little bit each day. But yeah, that's how I came across this game.
Hell yeah. Nice. So I'm like completely the opposite. I had never heard of this before it released. May 9th, 2024 we might look back on that day as like just a wild day in indie gaming history. Yeah. Like tons and tons of great games all dropped on that same day. And Animal Well was the game on that day that I was playing. There'll be an episode on that in the future as well. I've got a great guest lined up for that. I'm really excited. But 1000xRESIST was I was just like, oh, I saw it, but I'm busy, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Friend of the podcast, John from the Gaming in the Wild podcast, was like shouting from the rooftops about this game, 1000xRESIST. And my interests line up with John a lot of the times. I also saw Jacob Geller tweet about it, and like I kind of have the same kind of interest in weird, cool stuff that Jacob Geller tends to have an interest in. So those two kind of put it on my radar. And then I was playing a different game for the podcast. We'll keep it a secret for now, but I was not having a good time. And I was getting all kinds of FOMO about like this game that people say is really cool. And I'm doing fucking homework, like taking my medicine with this other game over here. And so I was like, fuck it. I'm going to ask and see if I can get a review code for 1000xRESIST. And they were like, yeah, sure, here you go. So I was like, all right, we're pushing everything out. We're playing this. And to get into like our quick opening thoughts here, basically from like the first 5 to 10 minutes of the game, I was so hooked on it. And the game did not let go. It still hasn't really let go. Like this game's kind of been dominating my head for the last like 3 weeks or so, ever since I got that code. I think this is like really, really good, like crazy good how they really toned down like the scope of what they wanted this game to like be like from a gameplay perspective. And they're like, we're focusing on the story, we're focusing on the presentation, we're focusing on all of these like real world human themes. We've also got this wild sci-fi stuff going on, but it all ties together super well. And it never really loses sight of that human side of it, which like, that's what some of the best sci-fi does. Like it gives you these crazy ideas, but there's also this stuff that we can relate maybe to your own life, but certainly to real world events and stuff like that. And I think this game does just an outstanding job of that. And man, it's going to be hard to top for like my game of the year list and stuff for this year. I thought this was really, really good. What would you say here at the top?
Oh man, well I echo a lot of basically pretty much all of what you said. That like it's one of those games that if you play it all the way through, you will not forget it.
Yeah.
And the couple things I want to like touch on with that is because, like I said at the top, this is a game made by Asian people from immigrant families.
Yeah.
And so much of that is embedded in this story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very personal experience where, unexpectedly, I'm going to get very emotional on this episode.
That's okay.
It is crazy. Like, dog, I'm going to be crying all over this episode, man. Like, it's one of those few times where you really see your life represented in this game. Like I said, this comes from the perspective of Chinese immigrants, and like for Filipino immigrants, the experience is like so similar. Just the traditions are a little different. The language is different. But there's so many similarities. So I felt like I was watching my life represented in a game. And of course, there's a lot of like, there's various nuances to this, but what makes that even more powerful is that, you know, we always strive to have representation in games. And that is no doubt that is a good thing. You see that manifest in so many interesting and fun ways throughout games. But 1000xRESIST is a game that's not just representation. It uses that as a platform to tell a much larger story. And not every game has to do that. Like, that's not everyone's goal. That's not what everyone, like I said, not everyone needs to do that. But the ones who can do that and who execute on it have something very powerful to say and show. And so when you start to get more involved in the deeper, like, political plot threads or the relationships, these exist outside of that representation, but because it's attached to it, there's like a through line that connects all of that together. So it feels like a very natural way to show our experience in a way that's like, hey, like, yes, this game has references to Chinese culture and like some characters speak Mandarin, but that is all encased in a much larger story. So it's really cool to see a game that can pull that off, where it's not about being Asian. It's about a much larger picture. And along the way, that is a core part of it.
Yeah.
So that's why this game's like such a personal experience to me. And I mean, obviously, like, not everyone's going to experience that, right? Because not everyone is Asian, or not everyone comes directly from immigrant parents. But I say this in my review, is that this is the perfect example of, quote, the local being universal, because you don't have to be from an immigrant family or be Asian to see what this game is trying to say. You might miss a little bit of the nuances. You might not have as strong of a personal connection to it, but you can still see the bigger picture. And that's what is so smart about this game, the way it weaves those intimate moments with its much larger storytelling. So that is so hard to pull off. And like, some of my favorite game stories are not as complex or nuanced as that. That's just a really hard thing to pull off, but this game makes it look effortless. I'm just blown away by how sharp it is. And I talk a lot about the one-liners, and in my review, I was like, this game has a bunch of one-liners, whatever. And you might think, like, if you look at a screenshot and read it, you're like, okay, yeah, whatever. I get what that means. But in the context of their moments, they are some of the most powerful things I've ever heard characters say. Like, man. And this isn't a very bloated game either.
No.
Like, especially the conversations. And I mentioned this in my review, that there's no codex. There's no long exposition. There's no like journal entries to read. Everything is told through its cinematography. It's like the just like the way that its art direction and the characters' conversations. And for them to get across so much detail and so much characterization in all that stuff alone is an absolute achievement. I am like blown away about how this is their first game.
Yeah.
And
it's
they
crazy.
made all of that work so well. And like, that's just like, that's my top level thoughts of just like what makes this game stand out. It's like, well, you're not going to experience a story like this. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of games that do go for this thing and work really well, but from a personal standpoint, this is that game that does that. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. And that's awesome. And that was part of, I actually invited you on to come talk about this game before I knew that was like touching you in that personal way. And then I read the review that you wrote for IGN, and I was really appreciating that game from that perspective. And I like, before we even like set up the story and stuff, at still top level thoughts here, I really appreciate what this game is doing, telling that story, because it's not my specific story in the same way that it's yours. I have experience as an immigrant minority when I lived overseas, but it was not exactly the same as what's being told in this story. And that's what, I could relate a little bit with what they're talking about in some situations they're talking about, but I don't have to relate 100% like with my own life to recognize like the value of telling stories like this, especially for people like me, straight white men, especially if you've only lived in the place where you were born. Seeing stories like this is valuable to help you understand and empathize with the way other people have experienced the world. And I think that like whatever your chosen medium, whether you like to read or watch movies or play video games or something like that, it's one of the best things that those things can do is help you relate with those stories. And so that is something that like, this game is not telling my story, but I so appreciate the fact that it is telling this particular story and that so many people have resonated with it. So it's really, really good. Let's put a pin in talking about this. Let's listen to a bit of music from the soundtrack.
Yes.
We will come back and we will set up what the story of 1000 Times Resist is actually about. All right, 1000 Times Resist is credited, the story, to narrative designers Pinky Lee and Connor Wiley, along with the creative director Remy Siu. And just want to shout the names out. The story is fantastic, so we got to shout out the people who did it. In the backstory here, and this is all from the Steam description, it might sound like I'm giving away revelations, but this is nothing really in comparison to what you learn. So in the backstory, this is on Earth, and aliens came to Earth. They're called occupants in the game. They're not hostile aliens killing everybody, but they transmitted a disease that has caused people to cry all of the moisture out of their body until they die. It's pretty sinister. You see some cool like signs in the first chapter that are talking about like, are you actually depressed or do you have this disease? And it's like, oh shit, like you can't even cry without attracting attention to yourself.
That is one of my favorite details.
Yeah.
Early in the game.
Yeah. It's so good. So we have this disease. There is one person who is immune and survives the disease. It is a teenage girl named Iris. And Iris, not only is she immune, she is also turned immortal at some point. And so the game actually takes place 1,000 years later. Iris is still alive and has created a society of her own clones who worship her. They call her the All-Mother. They all have to live underground because the clones are not immune to the disease. Only Iris is. So they live underground. They wear masks at all times. The clones are called sisters, and in their society, they play out functions to kind of keep the society running with the hopes of one day going over to the place where Iris lives to help her fight on the front lines against the occupants. so that one day they can all return to the surface. The sister functions are named after the things that they do. The main ones, the leaders, we'll say. There is Watcher, Knower, Healer, Principal, Fixer, and Bang Bang Fire. I think only one of those, actually, no, you should be able to figure out what all 6 of them can do, or what their job is. But you play as Watcher in this game. In the opening cutscene, again, this is in the trailer. This is like the first thing you see in the trailer, so it's not as big a spoiler as it sounds like. In the game's opening cutscene, your player character named Watcher approaches the All-Mother as she's reciting some kind of incantation. Iris asks her what's going on, and Watcher stabs her in the back and kills her. And then that's it. And then you travel back in time a little bit, wondering, how did we get to this point? And I gotta say, this is a pretty wild opening, even though I knew this was coming. Like, the way that it's all set up with the music, with the cinematography, it just leaves you asking like all the right kinds of questions, I think.
I'm running through the visions of the game as you're explaining. I'm like, yeah, I remember that. I remember that.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Yeah, it's a wild beginning. So like it rewinds a little bit. You play as Watcher. Watcher's function in the society is to relive the All-Mother's memories through this process called communion. These communions are the way that most of the story in the game is told. You do have like a current day timeline plot that's advancing as you go. So you have that storyline, but a lot of like the big story moments and big revelations are given through these communions. And so you're learning about Iris as you go because you're watching her memories play out. And then you're learning more about the society that they live in, this religion that's sprung up around Iris. I thought this is a really interesting way of kind of telling this story. Memory is a huge point of emphasis in this game. There is a major emphasis placed on preserving memories, discovering memories, maybe erasing memories, passing them on, inheriting memories. It's a big thing in the game. So I don't know. What did you think about the way that this was delivered with kind of mostly just learning about the past?
I mean, I think that stuff is powerful because it's not just that they have these dream sequences. They're kind of like paced out at a pretty regular cadence. Like once you do the second one, you're kind of like, oh, okay, I know that I'm going to go to this next character, commune with them, go to this next character, commune with them. So it has like that basic structure, but what the story is actually saying in those communions are they're fragmented, and they're fragmented on purpose. And so when talking to other people who are still going through the game, they have a lot of questions like, I don't really understand what this game is trying to say. And I was like, okay, well, yes. It's like things aren't exactly connecting, but I am intrigued. And that's exactly like how I felt too. I'm like, I am so intrigued. Like this doesn't totally make sense yet, but I trust that it will. So it's one of those kinds of games where the storytelling isn't necessarily linear.
Oh no.
And it's not going from one event to the next, to the next, to the next. And in these dream sequences, when you're in the communions, you are actually flipping through different timelines, or not different timelines, different points in time.
Yeah.
In those particular moments. So, and so it throws out all of these pieces. And I say that it's an ambitious narrative structure because you kind of create a problem for yourself where now you have to figure out how to bring it all together. And if you throw out all these pieces and you can't wrap it up by the end, then it all falls apart. So I have mad respect for the way in which they try to tell this story. So yeah, as you're going through communions, like, yeah, they might be like one after the other, but what's actually being shown is kind of wild.
Oh yeah. Yeah, completely out of order. It's a game where I was like glad I was taking notes for a podcast so that I could easily piece the timeline together. Kind of, it's gotten some comparisons with 13 Sentinels, the way that the story is told in that game. Another like super non-linear way of telling a story. This one was a lot less confusing to me than 13 Sentinels. I think that like you said, they set up a potential problem for themselves here, like laying it all out this way, but I thought it wrapped up together super neatly. And I was like only left with a few minor questions at the end.
Yeah. And the thing too is that this kind of ties back to what I was saying at the top, that the story is so dense because there are so many reads that you can have on this game that when they wrap it up, it's there is a definitive like conclusion, right? Like, or there are definitive things that happen in this game, of course. But in terms of what you take away from it, what you think it's about, or like what stood out to you most, it could be 10 different things and they would all be valid. When I was writing my review, it was really hard to figure out what I wanted to talk about. I talked about family. I talked about culture. I talked about politics. I talked about interpersonal relationships. I didn't really touch on what it says about how to handle a pandemic, just like stuff about one of the characters named Zhao, who represents like there's a moment in the story that talks about how Zhao is like being bullied for being I'm not going to say it, but we used to like for Asians who were born in their motherland, who moved to America or Canada, they get bullied for their accent, for the way they dress. And Zhao has a moment where she brings that up. And so it's also about that. It's about being an outsider too. And I didn't even like think of that until like I wrote all of my words. And so, yeah, that's just another thing that like I definitely got out of this game.
Yeah, let's just touch on like some of those real world things that the game is talking about, and that diaspora is like one of the strongest ones I think that it is bringing up. The feeling, because the characters here are high school kids. So, I mean, Iris is immortal at one point, but at the beginning, in the first flashback you watch, she's in high school. So that experience is really well realized, I think. And so I said that I have a little bit of experience like being the immigrant, right? But I was an adult when I did that. I lived in South Korea for a long time. So I was an adult. What this game is touching on is that experience of like being a teenager and going through this. And especially a lot of, with Zhao in particular, like it wasn't Zhao's choice to move to the US, or I think it's the US that this is taking place in. Could be Canada.
It's kind of, I think it's undefined.
But Western country. Not her choice. So like going through that when you just like, you don't really have a choice. You're a kid, so you're going where your parents go. And then there's a storyline with Iris's parents and how they were displaced from Hong Kong, also not really by choice. They're escaping a political situation over there. The real political situation that famously happened in Hong Kong in like the 2010s up through like 2020 or so. This game touches on that stuff too, and how that affects people. And I think that like the emphasis on that experience, going into this unfamiliar place, there's a quote early in the game where Zhao just like asks like, are they always so mean in this country? And I was like, fuck, like, yeah, I get that. I get it. Like, not from my own personal experience, but it's not hard to put yourself in the shoes and just kind of, this is how people experience, because high school can be fucking brutal. So it's really well realized, I think. In Sunset Visitor, I just want to point this out. The group of people that made this game, they self-describe as a group of majority Asian Canadian diaspora creators. So this is close to their heart. This is one of those games where like, you've got the creator's experience in the story front and center.
Yeah, that's like I said, when I met them, and then when I saw the games, like, oh, I think I know what this is.
Yeah,
or at least I know part of what this is.
Yeah,
and it's definitely, this is a story that only they can tell too. And that's the important part. I mean, like any game that is that specifically references a specific culture, and like the writing team is like, this is our experience. Of course, that's going to be the case. And like I say, that we have this shared experience, and it comes through so vividly and so familiar. And that's a credit to them. And I also mentioned this in my review, is that it's not just that they're using their experience in the storytelling. It's that it's told in a way that you can only really tell when you had enough time and maturity to really reflect on your upbringing. Because this is not a game like this story. I would probably not fully understand the story if I was like 20 or if I was 18 or 25. I'd still get it, right? But I think like so much of it is about when you become an adult and you take the time to understand what your parents went through. You can't really tell your parents' story until you become an adult and get closer to their age, look back at the stories they told you, and then start to contextualize it in your own experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then so everyone kind of goes through that phase with their parents where, you know, you as a kid, oh, I love my mom, dad, they're going to take care of me, whatever. You become an angsty teen. Then become a young adult, kind of like start to become your own person. And then when you get older, you're like, oh no, I love my parents. I can't wait to be with them again. And they're going to treat me like a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And then so that relationship with parents is, especially Asian parents, yeah, you go through that arc and you don't really realize that arc until you get to our age. So it's that as well.
Yeah. And just a quick shout out that Iris's parents are fairly, prominent main characters in the game. And I adore both of them as characters. Every scene that takes place like in their home is really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's just a really striking sense of place in that small apartment.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned too that I know what it's like when your parents move into a small apartment, like, yo, we made it. And then like when you go through that apartment many, many times, I start to like look at the details like, yo, they got that $200 rice cooker that my mom got when I was like, I remember that. That's the exact rice cooker. And then like the experiences of them being like when Iris gets older and her dad's like offering her like traditional foods. And she's like, I want pizza. I want, this is like the distinction between like when your kids start assimilating and that feeling of like, oh no, they're pulling away from our culture. I need to reel them back in to make sure that they don't forget where they came from. Mm-hmm. And then there's that natural tension between parents and kids. And so, and in that apartment is like, you just feel it in just like the way you navigate that, the conversations that happen and the fact that like to them, this is success. Like this is where it's at. And so, yeah, it's just really striking what all the stories that are told in that small apartment.
Yeah. Yeah. Remember the part there with the pizza when Iris says like her friends don't want to eat, quote, that stuff, talking about her dad's like homemade noodles, like Hong Kong style noodles. So like that, again, it's a story that I've heard so many times from Asian friends who grew up in the US. Feels like everyone has that exact same experience there. So
yeah.
It's super cool how this game like puts this front and center. This is the experience, and this is like part of Iris's background too. And I think one of the other things that this game really touches on is the way that trauma is passed on from generation to generation in different forms. And it's not like everybody in this game has a horrible relationship with their parents. It's more nuanced than that in this game, but those little things do get passed on. And then there's parts where you realize like, oh, I'm acting exactly like my parents here. And then that gets passed on to this. That's a part of this game. The connections again to the real world protests in Hong Kong. That's a prominent thing in this game. One of the first games I've played that feels like not like having a small reference to, but a very large reference to COVID with the sickness that's spreading. And especially the attitude towards the Asian students in the school as the sickness is spreading, that felt very real to me. And then, of course, we have a deification of Iris here. So all the things about, worship and organized religion. And this game has a really special thing, I think, where the god is a teenager. So like, what if society was born in a teenager's image?
Yes,
basically.
yeah.
So many things going on here. So many really cool things. Lots of stuff to dig into in that spoiler section. But I've been talking for a while. Are there any of those other themes there that we talked about that you want to dig into just a little bit more?
Man, like I said, there were a bunch of themes that I couldn't touch on in my review, and like, yes, that is one of them. Was like what it says about organized religions and kind of like cultish mentality.
Yeah,
and I think it's very smart, especially even just in the opening chapter where you're at those schools rooftop, and then there's like a prayer going on, and like it's just really weird. Like I have no idea what's going on here, but there's something happening, and it's kind of they play it for goofs, but that kind of like sets the tone for like, we're going in this direction. And I think like when you start to understand like the way in which that society is created in the future timeline, where everyone praises the All Mother and like everything runs through her, and in many, like not just for organized religion, but in so many other aspects throughout the story, it always pokes at what happens when you start to question the systems that you live under. How does that change people? How do people react to it? Who pledges allegiance? Who wants to break that system? And how does that start to affect the way they interact with each other, and like affect their day-to-day lives? So, I mean, the organized religion part, I think, is just one avenue for them to harp on that theme. Yeah. And that is another fantastic thing that this game does.
Yeah, and that's one of like the inciting events in the story is that Watcher, the character that you play as, learns something about Iris, the All-Mother, that kind of rocks the foundation, cracks the foundation of everything that she thinks is true, everything that she grew up knowing to be true. And so I'll leave like story details. We'll cut it right there. But that's the inciting event, is that not all is as it seems with the All-Mother and with this entire society. But it's not as simple as just saying like, oh yeah, the god is evil. Like it's not that simple either. It's more nuanced than that even. Which is something I thought was also really, really impressive.
Yeah. And like one more thing on that is like, everyone reveres gods as like these imperfect, or like as these perfect entities that can do no wrong. And the fact that you're going through Iris's life and seeing like, she's just like another person. And like as Watcher sees more of this, there's like this really stark contrast between who Iris actually was and how the rest of that society talks about the All-Mother. Like, y'all don't know that she's just another person. Yeah. And so even then, without even having to say it, this game is talking about idolization just by nature of the story it's trying to tell. It doesn't have to like point that out. It's just doing it because of what the story is going through. Yeah. So, I think we live in always lived in a society where religion is huge and like dictates a lot of things in people's lives. So to like break that down on such a scale, or on a smaller scale, but still be as powerful when you show that and say that in the game, is yet another achievement for this game. Yeah. It's man, just super impressive. I think we should put a pin in the story soon. Yes. Talk about some other stuff. We'll get into that spoiler section and really dig into this stuff. But to kind of close out this story section, I want to reiterate that like we have this big sci-fi idea, like a society of clones, aliens came, there's a disease, there's an immortal All-Mother. We have all that sci-fi. And then we have all this very real human element to the themes of this game, talking about, the experience of like you said, children of immigrants growing up and all parts of that experience, as well as lots of those other themes I talked about. And the game never really lets go of either side of that. Like both of them are extremely strong the entire way through. You can tell that like both were equally as important, or maybe even like the human side of it was more important, and the sci-fi part is a vehicle to get those stories told and those points across. And I just thought that was great. Like I was never like, I don't care about this side of it, I want to get to the sci-fi, or I don't care about the sci-fi story, I want more of like this other stuff. Like I thought both sides were equally strong and equally important for like the vision of what this game's trying to do. Absolutely. Yeah. So let's listen to a bit more music. We will come back, talk about, the way it's presented. We'll talk about that soundtrack a little bit.
talking about visuals and music in 1000xRESIST. First of all, let's talk about the way it looks. The art direction is credited to Kodai Yanagawa, and I think this game has like just really thoroughly entertaining and effective visual presentation. It's always switching things up on you, giving you different perspectives as a player in gameplay. It switches from third person to first person to side scrolling. And then from a cinematography perspective, always giving you like the most interesting possible shot, I feel like.
Ooh, yes. That is one of the strongest things about this game. And we touched on this earlier, but I want to emphasize that the cinematography, like the cinematics, the conversations that happen, the most important conversations, the camera angles that they use to emphasize each line, to show landscapes, to show scale, to show ethereal dreamscapes. Everything is so intentional, and you feel an intensity or an intimate moment, or just there's so much emotion that is communicated through how these scenes are shot, where the camera is, how they use color too.
Yeah,
what colors? Because a big tool that they use for communicating in the story is color. Each of the sisters have a specific color, and when you go into different environments, they use color to like just really like it's overwashed with this specific color. Like in the first chapter, when going through the school, in the aftermath, it's all like red. And then when you go into like the day before, it has like this really muted purple tone. And so they're creating a vibe, a mood, an atmosphere based off of the color palette alone. And they do this throughout the entire game. And so when you combine that with how they compose their cutscenes and dialogue sequences, there's so much that you feel from just watching these conversations play out. So it adds a gravity. It adds a weight, and it kind of provides a little bit more meaning towards these lines that the characters are saying.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the like interesting kind of cinematography, camera angles, set designs and colors and stuff can be attributed to, like you said earlier, this is their first game as a studio, but this is not their first foray into the arts. This studio has a ton of experience in all kinds of other arts like dance and theater, music, film, all kinds of stuff. And I think that really like shines through here in their creativity with the way that they set things up. And you've got some things that a lot of video games don't really get into with, like you said, the use of color, the use of camera angles, the use of like, okay, we're going to have a big fucking wide open space here to emphasize something. You have jump cuts between scenes that kind of disorient you as a player and kind of leave you wondering, okay, where am I now? What time is it? What year is it? Stuff like that. I think a lot of that can be attributed to their background, which is really cool. And it, like you said, lends a lot of impact to the scenes and conversations that you're in. I have so many screenshots of this game and just being like, look at what they created here. Look at this scene. And then it's never used again. It's just, they were like, this is really fucking cool. And it's gone forever after this conversation's over.
Yep. That is 1000% what they do with this. And and like their real world influences very much, not just like their lived experiences, but some of the like other stuff that they work on. So I know Pinky is very active in the activist space, and that shines through as well. Like I'm sure that is stuff that only like she can say in these particular sequences. It kind of like lends her perspective and strength to tell that part of the story.
There's one other gameplay mechanic. We kind of talked about how there's almost no gameplay in here. It's just walking around talking to people, mostly in that third person perspective. There's one thing that you do from time to time, and it's kind of like a hook shot or like a grappling hook, like jump or teleport from these nodes around. But I'm mentioning it in the kind of art and art direction section of the show, because I almost feel like those sections are there to show off kind of more surreal environments. Like there's one in the first chapter where you're surrounded by these giant school desks and chairs floating around in the air. and just gives them another like creative perspective to put you in as a player as you're kind of navigating these spaces. They look really cool. The gameplay side of it's very, very simple. And there are not that many of these sections, but every time one popped up, it was like, oh, things are weird now. So it was always kind of cool to see those.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how with that is also, this kind of like ties into how they frame things, but it also communicates a sense of momentum, especially with the sequences where you're flying through the different nodes, is that it feels like this game is moving in a specific direction, even though you're not really, there's no combat, there's no real puzzles, there's no fail states, whatever, but it feels like you are moving through this game. And that also ties into how they change perspective at specific moments to, again, communicate something very specific. So it's also that it feels like, oh my God, I'm like flying through a space that is so unfamiliar, and that like evokes a very specific feeling, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, like you said, like that perspective gives you the feeling of like the scene that you're in. So like contrast that with that like that momentum. Maybe you're chasing after somebody during those like hookshot type sequences. Contrast that with the parts that take place in Iris's apartment that are in first person in this tiny apartment, and you get that claustrophobic feeling that a teenager might feel in a apartment like that. Iris is having a hard time with her parents at times, especially with her mom, and so that kind of feeling that you get like being trapped in here, the perspective gives you that feeling as well. So it's all intentional choices that they made with how this is all presented.
Yes, absolutely.
Quick note on the voice acting here, and the voice acting I think is quite good. Feels very reserved, and it kind of left me, I don't know, kind of lulls you into a kind of trance to just take in and absorb this, the story. It's not what I would say is like a super outgoing and charismatic like voice performance from really anybody here. Everyone's real low key with their voices. And I'm not saying that as a criticism to anybody. It's just the tone that this all gives off. And I thought it was interesting because there's some wild shit that happens in here, but people stay relatively calm most of the time. Yeah. And I thought it was kind of cool the way that they, and it's another intentional choice to kind of give you a feeling.
Yes. I talk about voice acting in my review. I dedicate a whole paragraph to voice acting because it is another one of those absolutely striking things where I say that it doesn't feel like professional voice actors acting out a specific character or role, but rather people that I know in my life talking to me. And like that can be interpreted as like, oh, these aren't professional voice actors, or they're just saying their lines. But no, I think what you get throughout the game is a very natural, or it feels organic, these feel like organic conversations. But not just that, you mentioned that it's setting a specific mood, is because there is a trance-like quality to some of those dialogue sequences where they're saying things that don't really make sense, but doing it in a specific tone to where it feels like they're trying to like hypnotize me or something. Yeah. It's just, it creates this otherworldly feeling in a very like unique way. So it's just, again, chalk that up as another one of those things that this game does that you just don't see anywhere else.
Yep. Hats off for sure. Also contributing to the tone is the music in 1000xRESIST, credited to Lena Cacho and Drew Redman. I hope I'm pronouncing names correctly throughout the podcast, but the music I would describe as moody, first and foremost. A lot of like moody piano happening in the background, but it's not all, sad piano type stuff going on. There's a lot of variety in there depending on what's going on. We've talked several times about that first communion that you do where you're in the school, and the soundtrack in that, I was like, this is so unnerving and weird. And you have like this pulsing tone in the background with it's almost like a horror game soundtrack during that section. But then it switches up when you go to the orchard and you've got like this Nujabes sounding I've never said that guy's name out loud before. I hope I was saying it right. I fucking love
you
that
could
guy.
ask 10 different people and they will all say it differently.
Okay, fair enough. The Orchard has a soundtrack that reminded me of his music, and you have all these different tones going on, but I think the one word I would use to describe the music is moody, and also fantastic.
Yes. When I tried replaying this game, and like there's a low key piano song, or a song that is mostly from piano, and it plays at different points, and it also plays at the beginning of the game. But when you're first starting the game and playing it, this is your first time hearing it. But then when I heard it that second time, that hit me, and I was like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that, this is like a recurring theme in it. And there's so many standout tracks, but it's not like an RPG soundtrack where it is like at the forefront of the experience. It is definitely in the background that is kind of like setting, it's a tone setter, but it never, like, you don't necessarily notice it outright unless you stop to hear it. And when you do, you're like, oh dang, I didn't know, it's got some low key jams. There's one song that is uploaded on YouTube through the Sunset Visitor YouTube account called Urgency.
Yeah.
I can't remember exactly when it was played in the game, but I listen to it all the time because it is one of the best songs in the entire soundtrack. It is this really dark, like synthwave soundtrack or song, and it has like this bass drum that just keeps hitting, that feels like it's building momentum, and this very low-key harmony and melody that kind of like builds up and interacts with each other throughout that song. It's definitely one of my favorite tracks, and I think if you want to get an idea of what this soundtrack goes for, I definitely highly recommend checking out that song.
Yeah, I'll make sure to throw that in the episode here. Definitely buy the soundtrack and make sure to show off some of that music in the podcast here, because it's real good. This game sets up a real thick vibe, I would say. And music, the way the shots are composed, the art direction, that all plays a big part in the vibe of it. And then, once you're in it, once that vibe grabs hold of you, and the story is going to propel you forward. It's like I said, 15 hours of dialogue, it never dragged. Like, this game had insane momentum the entire time. So, once you're in it, I think the music, the way everything's shot, and then again, the story, it's just going to propel you through it. Let's get into some wrap-up thoughts here before we get into those spoilers. So when we wrap up this non-spoiler section, we always ask the question, what type of person would you recommend play this game? Who do you think this game would appeal to?
I would say, because I don't think it's gonna hit for everyone. I would say, I don't want to say an age bracket. I think anyone can relate to this regardless, but it's definitely for, I think you get the most out of it if you're really into like political thrillers. I think that is an important aspect to like grab you, because I'm thinking about like how in the first couple hours, what is going to grab you about it, because it like you have to trust that it's going to pay off at some point. I know people play certain games and be like, it's not really hitting, I don't get it, I'm going to move on, and that's perfectly fine. But for those who are going to get it in like the first couple chapters, I think if you watch a lot of anime that is, well, yeah, I think people who are into like darker thriller anime will definitely hit here. And like I said, I compare it to Evangelion. If you watch Evangelion, this is going to be up your alley because it touches on a lot of those darker mental themes. And like I mentioned, also Nier Automata. These are influences that the creators themselves have referenced.
Right.
So yeah, if you're into a lot of like Japanese games, like this is not a Japanese game, of course, but it draws a lot from that style of storytelling. And I think that's something that you get early on in this game. And if you love story, like this is a completely 100% narrative based game.
Yeah.
So if you're into those smaller stories throughout games, and I think if you're into visual novels, if you're into like walking sims, like Stanley Parable, maybe, or if you're, it draws a lot from those games as well. If you're looking for something action packed, if you play Call of Duty every year and Madden, like this ain't for you. But yeah, those who just love deep stories are going to get the most out of this.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's just anyone who is open to a deep story with a bunch of real world, very personal connections. And you have to be down for a game that has no action really whatsoever. There's one part in the game that I would describe as action, like 3-minute section. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it is kind of like an interactive walking sim. You are walking around talking to people or watching cutscenes. That's basically what this game is. And it fucking rocks at what it does. But you have to be up for that. You can't go into this game expecting it to be something else. So if you're down for that, it's one of the easiest recommendations I can make. Like, and again, to reiterate, we've talked, and Michael, you've talked about like a lot of the personal experiences and personal connections that you made with this game. You don't have to have that for this game to blow you away. Like the people in the Discord server who've been talking about it over the past couple weeks with me, I know about a lot of their backgrounds. It's not their story that this game is telling, but we're all just blown away by it. So I think that being open to seeing somebody else's story, number one, super valuable. But number two, that's what this game is doing too. So I think that appeal is there for a lot of people as well, especially like people who listen to this podcast every week. I hope that that's the kind of audience that I'm attracting. And I think that this game is going to be really valuable for people like you. And then if you do have that more personal connection to be made with any of those things we've talked about, then I think this is an interesting one to check out. So easy recommendations for the both of us for a certain type of person. So before we get into spoilers, we always do a little bit of housekeeping. So first and foremost, Michael, I want to give you the chance to talk about the stuff that you do out there. And like we mentioned before, you wrote the review on IGN for this game. Yep. So tell everybody where they can find you, the stuff that you make, anything like that.
Yeah, you can find me and all of my bullshit at Michael P. Higham on Twitter and at Higham Michael on Instagram. And I am currently working for IGN. I'm a tech reviews editor, so I review a lot of hardware, a lot of PC hardware, a lot of console hardware, mice, keyboards, controllers, headsets, all that good stuff. But also I take the time to find other avenues to talk about games.
Yeah.
So yeah, check out the review. It's on the site if you want a more in-depth look at it. But yeah, that's where you can find me, and that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. Yeah. Also enjoyed your review of Persona 3. I have
Reload.
Reload. I have not had a chance to play that. Tough to fit a 100-hour game into the podcast schedule, but one of these days. But I appreciate the work that you do. So I'll recommend everyone go check it out. I will put a link down in the show notes where people can easily find you and the stuff that you write, because it's good stuff.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So for this podcast, same ways to support as every episode. So first and foremost, this is a game that I think can promote some really great discussion. So I will plug joining the Discord server for the podcast. We had a dedicated channel for 1000xRESIST over the past couple weeks. Still going right now. People are not going to hear this until like a month later, but there's a lot of discussion to be had. So if you're not a member, feel free to join. There's an invite link down in the show notes. Come on in and talk about what you thought about this game, because there's a lot going on. Otherwise, you can leave a rating and review on the place where you listen to podcasts. It's super helpful. Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Podcast Addict are the main places to do that. Also, I have another podcast called A Top 3 Podcast. We do top 3 lists on that show. If we had a top 3 video game stories that blew my mind, this will probably be on there if we record that anytime soon. And last but not least, if you want to support this show monetarily, you can do that at patreon.com/RealDaveJackson. That is the place. Now, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, it's full spoiler time for 1000 Times Resist. All right, we're back, and it's full spoiler time for 1000 Times Resist, and non-linear storytelling in this game, and it's going to be a non-linear spoiler section as well, so I mean it. We're going to spoil something huge right away. So if you haven't played, if you don't want to be spoiled, please leave, go play the game, and come back. So, question for you, Michael. One kind of question that I had at the end. So, the things that you see as you're playing as Watcher, are they a communion with Watcher, with Blue later?
Yo, that is one of the coolest things this game does, man. I think it is. And I know this is in the notes. This is your first bullet point.
Yeah.
Is because, and I only remember, or I only know this because I replayed the game.
Me too. Yeah.
Yes.
I replayed the first chapter and I was like, what the fuck? It was there. It was right there.
It was right there the whole time.
Yeah.
But it's so subtle that by the time you find, but by the time you control Blue, like you very much, you don't remember that.
You've gone through so much.
It's so not,
Yeah.
So to get real quick, the thing is, like, throughout the first 6 chapters, you play as Watcher, and then something happens to her, and then you wake up playing as another shell with no name that lives in the old city, which is an underground part of the orchard. So that is modeled after, I think it's modeled after like a place in Hong Kong, because it has like all the neon lit signs and all the character, like the language is all over the place. The streets look like it. So it's kind of like this under society within like the whole station, and you wake up as another shell that looks just like Watcher but does not have a name, and their suit is gray because they don't have they don't have a color yet. Yeah, they don't have a color. They're not assigned anything yet. They're not even under one of the understudies for one of the other sisters yet.
Right.
And so that's when the stronger political themes start to kick into place. But it switches to this other character. And then in that first chapter, or like in the later chapters, and eventually they get the name Blue. And then so with Blue, at a certain point, you go back to find Watcher and commune again to get more out of her. But the thing is, once you know that, and then you go back to the first chapter, the first thing you're doing is you're controlling a version of Watcher who eventually approaches another version of Watcher with the bandana, with the bandages around her eyes.
Yeah.
Because at that point in the story, she loses her eyes. And then it kind of phases out, and for like a second, that body that is talking to the Watcher with the eyes gouged out, for a second it turns into Blue with the gray suit. And then so that that's implying that the entire time you're playing as Watcher is actually a communion with Blue and Watcher. So that is, I love that kind of shit, man. That's a real like near Yoko Taro type thing right there.
Yeah, it's super cool. Like so the first cutscene where Watcher kills Iris, Blue is there. But like the beginning of the game is so disorienting. Like I feel like I retained almost nothing except for Watcher stabbing Iris. That's all I remembered. And then you go back and you start chapter 1 again. And you're like, oh shit, Blue's there. And then there's a scene where Blue talks to Iris with no eyes, or not Iris, Watcher with no eyes. And then, it's just like, you're like putting these pieces together like, oh shit. So I'm not viewing, and this is a question I have for you too. Like, this game deals heavily with memories and people operating on incomplete or biased information. So you're not viewing, quote, the real story. You're viewing Watcher's memories of what happened.
Yeah.
And you're viewing Watcher's memories of a communion going into Iris's memories.
Yeah.
And then there's a thing later on where like Principal is shown to be able to fuck with the communions a little bit. So that calls into question everything that you see. And so like, to me, you could ask the question like, okay, well, is any of this real? Is any of that the real story? Like that's a little bit less interesting to me because you could just basically negate anything by saying like, oh, well,
it's just a dream.
It's biased, or it's all somebody's dreams or someone's, incorrect memories or something like that.
Yeah.
But what is interesting to me is how this is incomplete information that people are acting on. And the people do big things in this game based on what they see in these communions. So that also ties in with like Nier Automata, right? Like people making huge decisions, life and death decisions, killing people on bad information, basically. And that's super cool to me. Like people are just doing the best they can with what they know. But there's a lot of people who do stuff in this game and they got bad info. Like, they did the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that characters say throughout the story when you're communing with the sisters, is that, hey, you're not necessarily seeing the All Mother's memories. You're seeing what she wants to show you.
Yes,
and that's like it's another one of those like it's such a simple thing to say. But in the context of this game, it is so powerful.
It's the beginning, like the first half of the game, I would say, they paint Iris as the villain of the story. And that line you just brought up is such a key line for building up her villain and then like giving you like, once you start to see incriminating stuff about Iris, you'd be like, well, wait, why would Iris show me this?
Yeah.
If she's dictating what you can see in the communions, why would she let me see her communing with the occupants and stuff like all these bad things that she did? Why would she want you to see this? Does she want someone to come kill her and put her out of her misery? Is that what she wants?
Yeah.
It brings up so many questions. And I love how this game builds up this arc with Iris. Like, you start out learning about how shitty she was as a teenager and how she was a complete asshole to Zhao and how she was, just generally a moody teenager with her parents. And then she starts doing some actual like real fucked up stuff. And you get to see all of that stuff too. And then they chip away at that, like that villain that they've built up. And then by the end of the story, I felt like Iris was a really sympathetic figure, just like a lot of those decisions that she made that are like the big evil acts are decisions that she made when she's like a teenager. She's like 17 or something like that. Yeah. And now suddenly she has all this power. Like, come on.
That's a really good thing to point out too, because I was like kind of shocked when you go through the dream sequences where like the soldiers are like asking her, hey, what do you want us to do? What do you want us to do? Because they're essentially like, she is in command of this whole thing because she is the one. And she makes some really bad decisions off of like gut instincts and just like a very immature person, because that's who you are when you're 17.
Yeah.
And that dictates the fate of the world. And that's just like a crazy thing that's really portrayed really well in this game.
Yeah. Like that early thing where, so they're building her up as this evil god basically. And I was like, oh shit. So this opens up this like, what if your god is a teenager and makes all of the rash and emotional decisions that a teenager makes, but it's life or death. Like, anyone who displeases her gets incinerated. And then you learn about like the story of the youngest and the youngest's fate and all of these things. And I got the feeling like, okay, Iris doesn't think things through the way that she should because she's a teenager. And even though she's immortal, like I kind of got the sense that at least at the beginning of this, like she's still emotionally a teenager,
Yeah.
right? And then at the end of the story, when you see like what's going on with her at the end, she just seems like tired. I think.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's communicated a lot throughout the story, especially in the ending when I don't know if we want to get into this now, but the staircase,
fine,
the staircase sequence with Iris and her mom,
Yeah, fuck.
where it's like this vision of her talking to her mom. She's sitting on the staircase and then asking her mom, like, how did you do all this? Like, I'm so tired. I'm so done. I don't want to do anything. How did you like pick up your life, move to a different country and raise a child? Like, that's like Iris reaching like a breaking point where she doesn't know how to handle all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a powerful moment that also touches on the other themes of like generational trauma and just like parental relationships among immigrant families. So I don't know if we got to get into that now, but yeah, that is like when you have these visions of her parents in that apartment, and when you dig into with their life in Hong Kong, and then you start to see Iris, it's like she's going through a similar thing, but just in a variation. And the end result is they're just so tired, worked up, and don't know what to do, even though they've like tried their best, or, you know, it touches everybody.
Yeah. That stuff with her parents is great. So like her parents' backstory, real quick, they were part of the umbrella protests in Hong Kong. They met during the protests. The really cute story about how they met when I think her dad like tricked her mom into putting her phone number on like an emergency emergency contact card or something like that. And that's how they met. And then they started dating and stuff. Iris's maternal grandmother is on the other side of that political conflict. Like she's like a CCP supporter in that whole conflict in Hong Kong. And that causes a bunch of issues with Iris's parents. And then they leave, they move to Canada. So they're going through it too. Like this is not like they were, you know, planning to do this. It very much felt to me like they're escaping a harsh political situation. And so they're just going to make the best of the place that they land. And they never seem like completely comfortable with everything going on because, you know, how could they be? And then with that generational trauma aspect, some of that stuff gets passed down to Iris, and then Iris passes that down to the clones. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, it just keeps going down and down and down. But it's, like I said in the non-spoiler part, it's more nuanced than just like, you know, someone's parent was an abuser and then like this person grows up and they're also an abuser. Like it's not like that.
Yeah. And
then the more you learn about Iris and stuff, the more you learn kind of, I actually want to get your thought here. I got a feeling I promise this is connected to that generational trauma line here, but I got a feeling toward the very end of the game, Iris might not even know about this whole religion built up around her in this society.
Yeah.
She seems so focused on keeping, I take that back. She probably knows that there are the clones, but she seems so focused and busy with keeping the occupants at bay, basically. Like she's bearing the full brunt of their needs, we'll say. That like, I don't think she knows anything about that society. And so like that whole thing about like you perform your function, you can go to the front lines and like join the All-Mother. I got the feeling that Iris like maybe barely knew about that, but she was not like a full participant in this whole thing. What did you think about that?
Well, because you see the memories of like the origins of that society. You see the first, like the first BBF. You see the first healer, the first knower, the first versions of each sister. And Iris was very hands-on. You see a lot of, and I think a lot of Iris's character comes through in those moments when you see the origins of the sisters. And like you'd mentioned, the generational trauma aspect and it being passed down to the clones, that is all told in that origin story. And it's some pretty fucked up shit there.
Yeah.
It's really fucked up shit. And so but by and large, there comes a point when Iris is like not involved at all at the orchard. No one sees her unless you get called up and you take the train, and then it's like, hey, you made it, you got called. It reminds me, I don't know. Well, in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, I don't know if folks have played it.
I played it, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, like when you reach your 10-year mark, you get sent off.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this is, where it's like, hey, you reached the end of your service. Now it's time for you to. It's not exactly the same because in Xenoblade you die, whatever. But getting called up to be like, hey, now you are going to serve your real purpose. But I don't think. Iris is just not hands at all. Like, people revere the All-Mother. They've never seen her, though.
Yeah.
So their only image is that statue in the orchard. And everything else is ran by principle. So this entire society is dictated by principle. And, like, you eventually you see that becomes, like, very clear. So, yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of got the feeling that, like, Iris knows that there are the sisters there. And she initially distanced herself because the sisters were so needy that she could have like no time to herself.
Yeah,
and, like,
I remember this. Yeah,
like I'm not a parent. I don't have kids, but seems very real, especially if you have 6 kids.
Yeah,
you would never have time to yourself, I feel like.
Yep.
And so Iris has the capability, and I guess like still that rash teenage mindset of just like, okay, well, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
See ya. So she leaves. And then I think that she's aware of the society going on there. But like you said, when the sisters are chosen and they get sent out to go, quote, fight with Iris, I'm not even sure that they actually meet her. Or if they go there and Iris is like, who are you? And then like goes back to this communion with the occupants. And that's the sisters never come back because it's revealed later that Principal's whole plan is Principal is trying to impress Iris by sending the best of the best. And anyone who can't get Iris's attention is obviously not worthy. So they get fried, basically.
Yeah.
And then, we try again. So I got the feeling that this was like 95% Principal. And then Iris is just kind of like tangentially aware there's stuff happening with the others. Did you get that too?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, dude, like, because like I said, it gets, so to back it up a little bit, Principal was the first Watcher.
Yeah, she's the youngest. Yeah, the one who committed the original sin.
Yes. She's often referred to as the youngest or the first Watcher, who is Principal, who is the one who has most of the power in that society. And so when you look back at how Iris or the All-Mother treated Principal, or at the time the youngest, was a very abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And it was, like you said, the youngest was the needy one. There's a specific scene where Iris is in her room. Like, this is when she lived in the orchard. She's in her room, like in the corner, just like trying to catch her breath. And you look out of the window and it's youngest knocking on the window. Like, hey, pay attention to me. And then Iris is just like, yo, what the fuck? Leave me alone.
Yeah.
And then, it's that mentality that she eventually becomes Principal that she never breaks out of. Yeah.
That need for approval from Iris. So her original sin, for those who are just listening, this has been a real zigzag of a spoiler section so far, but it's fine. But for those listening who didn't play the game, the original sin that Youngest created is Youngest to get approval from Iris. Youngest thought that Iris was lonely, so they decided to make a clone to be Iris's friend. And so she makes a clone of Zhao, who is Iris's, reluctant friend. Like, Iris reluctantly is Zhao's friend in the real world events, the backstory. But the clone is like real fucked up. It's super gross.
Yeah, it's like a Two-Face.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And Iris like lashes out, cuts the clone's throat, and then basically banishes the youngest. Basically says like, I never want to see you again. And then you think that the youngest died, but you learn later on that it's Principal, and she's doing this whole society, sending the best of the best, all to get Iris's approval. So like you build up this villain in Iris, and then you chip it down with what you learn about who she actually is and how she feels, and the really unfortunate circumstances surrounding like the decisions that she made, even if they're bad decisions. And then you build up Principal's in charge. Principal's doing all this stuff. And then you learn Principal's motivations. You're like, well, that's heartbreaking too. Like everyone's going through it in this story.
Yeah. Yeah. The wild shit is because when we talked about who are you really seeing this through, and Principal can manipulate what people see in the communion. Is that the case? To what extent? And then so when the game opens up with Watcher killing Iris or the All-Mother, and then you get to that you get to that point mid-story when it comes back around, and that's when Principal walks in and says, "All right, cool, you did exactly what I needed you to do. Now you're banished." And then you realize that when Watcher is going through Iris's memories, is Principal like specifically creating these sequences to get Watcher to be angry at the All-Mother and wanting to kill her, rather than Principal pulling up and killing her herself. So she uses Watcher as a proxy to kill the All-Mother.
Yeah.
And that was all motivated through what Watcher saw in those communions.
Yep. So the inciting event, that thing that right before we put a pin in story talk that I mentioned, is Iris's friend and heavily implied lover, Fixer, gets chosen to go on the train and go meet the All-Mother. So like that person is effectively gone. People don't come back. Like they in the lore, the religion, they spend the rest of their days fighting alongside the All-Mother. You have no expectation of ever seeing them again. But then in that first communion, Fixer shows up in the communion that's not supposed to be possible, and basically tells the truth. Like the All-Mother's not who she seems. She's working with the aliens. Like this is all a lie, basically. And then she disappears. And Watcher tells the truth. She reminded me a lot of 2B really early in the game from Nier Automata. Like that real like dogged loyalty to your handlers, whatever, or the authorities, like dedication to the mission, and like the mission to a T, basically. So she turns her in, but that was not actually Fixer in the communion. That was Principal in disguise. So that was another thing that I wanted to bounce off you, but you already answered it, is so this whole thing is eventually at some point, Principal got tired of this whole thing and then set up a way to get rid of the All-Mother and take power for herself.
Yeah. And the way you get to that point, or not get to that point, the way you start to navigate the aftermath of that point, is so. This shit is crazy, dog. Like, because that's when the game starts to kick. So that's when it switches the perspective to blue.
Yeah,
and then it becomes a political uprising, like a lot more. Like it's at the forefront. That becomes what the story is, and then it kind of starts to take a whole nother life in and of itself. And now this game is about something completely different, but the work that you put in to get to that point makes everything so impactful and so meaningful. So like when you have you have this full understanding of who the clones and the shells are, you have this understanding of a structural society, of these customs and these sayings, and then once you get to when Principal takes control, you slowly see how this turns into a dictatorship and like a wiping of the All-Mother's like the cultural traditions. Like people don't say Hekiamo anymore. People don't say Heki Grace anymore. People don't refer to the old ways anymore. And they're like, oh, that is in the past. We don't do that anymore. And it becomes like this militaristic structure, this martial law that exists now in the Orchard.
Yeah.
And so when you play as Blue and then go back to the Orchard after Principal has fully taken control, it is like this whiplash that you're like, what the fuck happened? Like this whole entire place is completely different. There's security checkpoints. There's sisters with like armed sisters at these checkpoints. And there's like just this, all of these things that have been like completely rewritten to in the image of Principal, or it's in what Principal wants. It is a wild change in direction.
It felt to me like this is like a real world analog to, well, let's just say Hong Kong and China, as China's power grows within there. And this place that was once familiar still looks the same, but it's not the same place anymore. Nothing really functions the same. And that erasing of the past is a thing that the rest of the game grapples with, is like, how do you handle those things in the past? And so there's this faction that wants to erase all mention of the All-Mother. And that's something common, I think, with dictators, right? Like the new dictator wants to remove all mention of the previous people. So you have that going on. Then you have like these other little groups that are like, we're the traditionalists. Like we want to remember the All-Mother, like these little other groups. And those become stronger as like Principal's society weakens as you go. And I thought that was really interesting too. Yeah. And you have the introduction of the Zhao clones for the first time, but the Zhao clones are operating on this incorrect information, because the only information they have is Zhao's diary, the original Zhao's diary, where she idolizes Iris. And so the clones think that they should idolize the Iris clones. And so you set up this class structure within the Orchard of like this subservient group, but they think that's the way things should be because that's how the original Zhao was, even though she wasn't.
Yeah.
So this like new society that's built in the Orchard is super interesting to me, just with like the amount of perspectives going on in there, when before the old Orchard was like all Hekialmo, right?
Yeah.
It's super cool.
It really puts into perspective like the cultural shift that happens when there's a new power in place.
Yeah.
It's so well done. Oh my God. Yeah. And just like tying that theme into like the past and memories, and like you do that for the first half of the game on an intimate level, then you start to do that on like a grand political level. And fuck, when as Blue starts to get radicalized, there's so many great moments in the Undercity before Blue gets more or less like promoted into the Orchard. Like she can go there now. You have to, again, these are like, it's like a tiered caste society, and you're always wanting to ascend to the next level. And like, that means leaving people behind. That means siding with your oppressors in a way. And there's so many moments where like when you're playing as Blue, you're like scheming to get up there. And when she meets with her friend, Chris, there's so many great one-liners that really put into perspective people who are involved in political revolutions, what they think and feel in their thought process, how they get to that point. There's so many great lines that really encapsulate that theme. And this is why I emphasize this in my review, is that this game is so good about making you understand that political revolutions are felt on a deeply personal level. And that's what motivates people to put their life on the line for something that they believe in, for a cause. Like people, I mean, obviously, like, people want a better life. They want to take action to change things. But what gets you onto the streets, what puts you into harm's way, what puts you into willingly being able to do that comes from a very deeply personal level.
Yeah.
And then so, yeah, I love that whole switch to blue when you're in the Undercity, because there's so many good set pieces there that are established there. Especially, we didn't even talk about Bartender. Bartender is just straight up one of the best characters in this game, where she's kind of like, she's like this, I wouldn't say double agent, but she's like one of the ones who like moves between the different societies and kind of like keeps it low key. Security kind of knows that she's up to something, but is able to play it off in a way, and then is like an integral part to the revolution. And that's such also like a really key character who has like this really distinct personality.
Yeah. She seems like she kind of exists like in the first half of the game in like the All Mother Society. She feels like she kind of exists outside of that. She's just kind of there taking it all in. Mm-hmm. And then you learn what's been going, like her role this whole time. She's been going back and forth between these two societies, basically. So maybe the reason she doesn't get super involved in the things on the top is because she knows and sympathizes with how things are on the bottom.
Yeah.
And it's her killing, like a targeted killing, that radicalizes Blue, where she's just kind of like of all the people, Bartender, she's the one that has to go. So that's what gets Blue into it really heavy, and like actually gets Blue to start doing all these reckless things that like contributes to the downfall of Principal's new society.
Mm-hmm.
Super cool. There's a note, and like just one quick thing about Principal that I thought was really good, like characterization. So she's shown as like this strong-fisted, no bullshit military leader. She's commanding this, what's the word? I don't know, this military force of these Red Sisters in this section. She finally has like this power that she grew to want. And she rules over this place like, with an iron fist, and keeps everybody down, basically. And then there's this part where they have a play where they reenact the All-Mother's killing. And they do it every year. And the sisters all feel weird about, like, especially the actors feel weird about the parts they play in in there. Like the person who plays Watcher is like, I don't really want to, like, I'll do my best, but everyone hates this role. During that part, when the All-Mother is dying in the play, Principal gets up on stage and like she plays herself because Principal was there in the events. But she like goes off script and makes the actor for Iris apologize to her personally.
Yeah. Oh, it's so fucking weird.
Yeah. She says like, say that I should have accepted the gift and say that you forgive me. Like makes the actor say this. And I was like, fuck, she's still carrying this.
Yeah. It's deranged. It is like some serious trauma that, not even trauma, just like this fixation that she will never let go.
No.
And uses this play as like a way to like, oh man, yeah, that is such a dictator move too. But that whole play scene also is the moment when Blue, that's a fucking suicide bombing.
Yeah, it is.
That scene is insane, man. It's like, we're going to put you in the shoes of someone who's going to do a suicide bombing. And that is wild. And so the bomb is planted in one of the cakes that are right. It's in the fruitcake, and it's the same fruitcake model that's been used in every single clone birthday party for Iris, and it's the same fruitcake that her parents bought her when she was like in the real world. Like all of these, like you said, fixations. It's wild, like how that detail. And you're just like, and every time that someone mentions a cake or something, you're like, it's going to be that fucking fruitcake again, isn't it? And it is, because that's what they have. That's all they know. Yeah. Because like this entire society is built off of in Iris's image and in her memories. So everything that she experienced in her life are the only things that really exist in this society.
Yeah.
So another thing I want to say about that scene when we talk about cinematography, dog, as each piece of that play is going out and it switches back to Blue's hand with her thumb on the detonator. And it says, the game asks you, pull the trigger and wait.
And that's during the scene when Principal's like feeding the actor lines. It's during, so like you could miss that if you press the trigger early, I think.
Yeah. And I waited until the very end.
Me too. I was like, am I going to miss my chance?
Yeah. And just that scene where she pulls the trigger, it blows up. And of course, like Blue survives as you continue to play her. And then you're laying next to the dead Zhao clone, and it is like just shocking event that was like, oh shit, political revolutions are messy and they are violent. Yeah, and they show you that firsthand right there, and then it starts to kick into kicks off the next wave of events in the game. It's fucking that's crazy.
Also, like, while this is happening, Watcher is in prison.
Mm-hmm.
In this new society, we forgot to mention another dictatorial move, right? They have a body hanging up that they say is Watcher's body, as an example for everybody else. But it's not actually her. Watcher was in prison this whole time, for a long time. Just, in there, there's a guard in there. We'll talk about that guard a little bit later. Watcher names her Mauve because she doesn't have a color, I don't think. No, she doesn't. She's gray.
Yeah.
Watcher's in there. One of my favorite characters in the game is Knower, for the way that Knower plays both sides ultimately to advance good. But she's the one who cuts Watcher's eyes out. She's the one who's torturing her when she's in prison because she knows that that's what she has to do in that moment. I love the way that Knower plays both sides throughout this, like, we've caught up to that scene. Now we're in like the after society, and I love Knower in this part, like so much. Like the way that she just kind of like jumps from place to place, side to side, but ultimately like you have a feeling she's working for the right side, and that is what's going on.
Yeah. This is really interesting too, because this is when Fixer, BBF, and Healer come back into the picture, where the old sisters did not die; they went into hiding in planning a revolution as well. And then the point being that Blue fucked it all up because Blue took too radical of an action too early and then fucked everything up. And that is like in revolutionary politics, like that's just like something that is like studied when insurgent groups like take action into their own hands and then kind of fumble what another insurgent group or another like organization was trying to do, even though they had the same goals. So that's there. Knower's playing both sides, and you're seeing this you're communing with Watcher, and so you're seeing the events as you're communing with Watcher in that train. So you see her tied up, and eventually, like gradually, Knower's like, hey, trust me, I know what I'm doing. I have to play this part, but we're going to get you out of here. We're going to solve this thing. Yeah. And then slowly, Knower's like, actually, you know what? I'm going to need to do this. We can't do that. And you gradually see Knower having to play the part of of Principal's new government. Yeah. And you see it on her body too, when she starts to change uniform, and Watcher's like, hey, what's going on? What's up with your uniform? She's like, hey, listen, this is just what we have to do. And that starts to come into question, like Knower's allegiance. Yeah. And so when you see her jumping back and forth, being a double agent, like that's I was on the edge of my seat. And when I talk about the story's momentum, I was like, I need to see the next scene with Knower. What is she going to do next? And then eventually it gets to the point where both of Watcher's eyes are plucked out, and you can't see anything, obviously. It's all black, but then that's when you see Healer, like the rest of the sisters come in, and they have that conversation where Knower's like, hey, it's about time you got here. What are you doing? And then they're like, we're getting Watcher out of here. Like, why did you do this to her? And then Knower's just like, hey, listen, it's just what I had to do. And then Knower's like, all right, I'm going to need y'all to hit me to make sure it looks like that I was assaulted in the process, so I can stay looking like I'm on their side. And it's just like this really funny conversation in this very serious moment. But like that whole sequence of being in prison as Watcher is some of the best like groundwork laying for its political themes. So
yeah, and like that perspective that they give you as all this stuff is playing out, but Watcher's just in this room. Like the only information you get is what you overhear when people are in the room with you, basically.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. They all join up together on the train that goes between the orchard and the place where Iris used to live. And Fixer's reunited with Watcher on the train. And Fixer, like in a kind of surprise, does not forgive Watcher. Like, and Watcher dies. And even after that, Fixer is just like, okay, we're moving on. Like,
I can't carry you in a backpack.
Yeah.
Fuck.
Yeah. Really surprising to me, but I mean, I guess it would make sense. Like, Watcher thought she was turning in Fixer, and Fixer never forgives her for this. It feels like a very real thing to me that not every action is forgivable.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely. Yep. That is some real shit.
Yep.
Even though like the relationship between Watcher and Fixer, it's shown explicitly in certain like memories or like certain things that in the early on in the game, but you never got like the full picture of their relationship. But it is one of the most powerful relationships in this game. Because again, like many other things in this game, there's a lot that just doesn't need to be said. They just show you and you piece it together. And Fixer standing next to Watcher's body as it's being burned and then just moving on is like, you just incinerated the main character for half this game. Yeah. And now we're moving on is crazy. Like, and then like that says so much about how Fixer felt about their entire relationship this whole time. Yeah.
And they had a relationship, like they loved each other. It was not just a friendly relationship. And I think in Fixer's eyes, Watcher threw that all away when she made that decision, even though it was her duty and it was a mistake. Like she was tricked into it.
Yeah.
She still doesn't forgive her for it, but it, like you said, it still feels real.
Yeah.
So, let's fast forward a bit because we're running up on time here, and we got to talk about the way this ends.
Oh God,
and, what the game's trying to say at the ending. So, basically, the plan for the revolution is the little robot drone things that help with the communions. Those are actually, I forget what they call them. They're little
secretaries.
Yeah, the secretaries. I forget what they call them. Like their role.
Oh, yeah.
As they're machines from the occupants, basically. And they had the original communion technology. Iris learned how to do it herself and then communed with the original sisters to share her memories with them. That's where this tech comes from. The plan is to get all of these secretaries together and do a mass communion to share all the memories with all the sisters, put everyone on the same page with all the same knowledge, basically. And that will help the uprising to overthrow Principal and Mauve. What happens, though, during that final communion, you talk with Secretary, and Secretary gives you a choice of basically who to include in this new world, which is, that's how I read this.
Yeah.
Real quick, I thought it was very cool that the occupants are there because they're attracted to memory formation and that they were going to even protect the earth from the eventual burnout of the sun to just keep feasting on these memories. And there's a really fucked up scene later where a bunch of people die, the soldiers die, and one of them says to the other, we can't tell them because all of the emotions surrounding a bunch of people dying will draw the aliens here. Everyone stay cool, and we can't tell them. Not because we want to hide information for any other reason. It's literally like, if people cry and people get upset, the aliens will find us, which is really fucked up, suppressing that. So,
Jesus Christ.
So during this final communion, you get to choose who are you going to include in this new world. When Principal's government is overthrown, who should be there? And you go around to all of these characters and groups of characters, and talk to them, and they kind of talk to you about their ideology a little bit and how they want the new world to be shaped. What do they want the new world to be like? So just ask you first, what did you do here? Who did you take with you?
I know what I did.
Yeah.
So I turned the lights off on 3 characters.
Okay.
On Principal, on Mauve, and on the Red Guards.
Okay.
So anyone who is directly responsible for a dictatorship.
Yeah.
So I got rid of them. And I think that gave me the best ending possible.
It does. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So yeah.
Okay. So we'll go back to that because I did that too my third time as I was like playing around with this.
Yeah.
The first time I left all the lights on because I really got a message from the game that you need to basically keep all the memories. Every memory, even if it's violent and suppressive and all of that, everything will help you build a better society going forward, having that knowledge. There's a quote from Nowhere that it's like one of the more common screenshots I see out there where it's in that big kind of like dark red, purplish plane. And Nowhere says you must learn to live with the mistakes that you've made.
Mm-hmm.
I took that to mean everything stays. Everything should stay and you learn from that. What happens if you do that is as soon as you wake up from the jump through the glass ceiling, steal it, do the communion, as soon as you wake up from that, Mauve kills you immediately.
Yeah.
So wrong choice. And I think what the game is trying to say there, what the story is trying to say is what you said, that the actors in the dictatorship, and whether you want to make real world analogs or not, it's kind of, I mean, the red color I don't think is an accident there.
Yeah.
They're saying that that needs to be removed, that we can't have that in our future society.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time I tried it by removing Mauve and the Red Soldiers, but I left Principal because of that somewhat sympathetic turn, the sympathetic backstory of Principal, not necessarily the things that Principal does in that timeline. What happens there is actually exactly the same as the ending that you talked about.
Yeah.
The only difference is in the ending you talked about, you go back to the orchard, you play as a Zhao clone way in the future. And Blue is there, and Blue kind of guides you around the orchard and tells you to go to the gravestones and read the epitaphs about the sisters and the prominent characters.
Mm-hmm.
In the ending I just talked about, it's Principal that's there, not Blue.
Yeah.
But it's the exact same. There's no hostility, but there's a difference. The difference between the two is what's written about all the characters.
Yes.
And it just shows you that history is written by the survivors or the winners, however you want to put it.
Oh my God. That was because I kept poking and prodding at how to get different endings at this point, right?
Me too.
And then I got the one with Blue at the orchard, remembering all the sisters, and you read the epitaphs, and like they're written in a way that is kind of sentimental and kind of respectful of the lives that they lived.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll notice that bartender is included in the gravestones.
Yes.
When you do that when Principal, you keep Principal alive, and Principal's body is wild. She starts to turn into like this alien figure.
Yeah.
And I assume that's like her trying to preserve herself. And then Principal like tells you to do the same, like go visit the gravestones and come back to me.
Principal looks like a final boss in a Final Fantasy.
Yeah, it's wild. And then everything written on those epitaphs are so petty and resentful.
Yeah.
And bartender is not included. And and then they ask you to go behind the waterfall and like see the original gravestone of the original sisters, and like that's slightly different too. But the eventual, like the final cutscene, I think is the same.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The final cutscene's the same. It is Blue emerging on the surface because the plan lets the orchard go up to the surface. She takes off her mask and like takes a breath of the surface air because the aliens are gone, the occupants are gone, so the disease is also gone too. And you can feel the relief when she takes off her mask, you're like, yeah, fresh air. Let's go.
Mhm.
And then on the beach, it shows Iris walking out onto the beach, waved over by the original sisters on the beach. And to me, this was, we've had this mass communion. Iris's memories are now shared with everybody. So it's a figurative homecoming for Iris. After all this, 1,000 years plus, she lives on in the memory of the survivors, and she gets to go back home.
Man, this game, dog, like, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah, that ending, like, the whole ending there is, and another thing too, when you are at the orchard reading the epitaphs, for the sisters that you knew, for the fixer, healer, BBF, and knower that you knew, when there's echoes of, like, there's like figures in their color that have like a trace, like they're tracing their memory or footsteps. And when you actually look at them, it's pretty wild, where like the one with Watcher and Fixer, you could see them at their starting points, and then if you chase those shadows down, they eventually get to the point where they're like hanging out with each other. And then another one with BBF and Healer, I think you see BBF like jumping from the top of the stairs to go be with Healer, and I think Knower is like at the top of like the orchard, just overlooking this, and it says so much about who they were. Where these final echoes you're seeing are like, this is what their life was when they lived here.
Just distilled down into like these 4 little like silhouettes.
Silhouettes. That's a better word. So
it's super cool.
That was really powerful to me.
Yeah. It is a really powerful game. And in this conversation here, there's a bunch of stuff that we didn't have time to touch on. It is
my bad.
It's all good. Like, this is the type of game that you could spread out into like a series of discussions, and like, all right, today we're going to talk about like, you could do it. I know Geeks and Grounds with Jenny Wyndham is doing this.
Nice.
Like episode by episode talking about this, maybe not one chapter at a time, but definitely doing that book club style. This game definitely supports that like level of conversation. But, man, I'm really happy with this discussion that we've had about this. This has been awesome, and I thank you so much for taking this time.
Of course, yeah. It feels like a pretty big relief to like talk to somebody about it. At this level too. I don't think I've had like back and forth on Discord with people who've played the game, but like I haven't sat down with somebody for 2 hours to talk about it. And this is like kind of how I imagined it would turn out, where it's like jumping between all these different themes and still having so much more left to say. But yeah, this it felt good to like get it out of my system, because I've been thinking on it. I have not stopped thinking about this game from the minute I started it. Yeah.
And I mean, just because the conversation is winding down here doesn't mean I'm done thinking about it either. So let's have people, if you're still listening, continue the conversation in the Discord server one more time. Love to have you come in. We've given our interpretation of things that happen, but if you have a different idea, or if you want to just join the conversation, that's going to be the best place to do it. And one more call at the end of the episode to check down in the show notes, find that link for everything that Michael's doing. Check him out on social media. Good follow, good reading. Everything that he writes that I've seen is worth your time. Thanks, Michael, man. Again, thanks so much for coming on. And this has been great.
Hell yeah. Thank you so much, man. I really, really do appreciate it.
Yeah, awesome. So that is all. Thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, I appreciate you very much. And as always, tune in next week for the next game to come out of the backlog.